Hi everyone, welcome to Not Your Model Minority, Debunking Stereotypes in Asian American YA, a panel discussion as part of the Asian Author Alliance's AAPI Book Month. May is Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, and attacks against Asians in not just the United States, but all over the world are continuing today. Our goal for this event is to increase empathy and understanding so that viewers out there understand the harmful effects of stereotypes such as the model minority myth. I'm Lyla Lee, the author of I'll Be the One, which is about a Korean American girl who enters the internationally broadcasted reality TV show to become one of the world's first K-pop stars. I'll be moderating this discussion, and we will now go on to introduce the other authors here with us today. We'll start by going around and introducing ourselves. Starting with Katie. Katie, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, certainly. I'm Katie Zhao. I'm the author of the middle grade series, The Dragon Warrior. And I'm also the author of the forthcoming young adult thriller, which is also my young adult debut, called How We Fall Apart.
Yay. So I go next, sorry. I'm Nandini Bajpai. I'm the author of A Match Made in Mehendi, which is a young adult contemporary. It came out in 2019, and my new book is out in a week and a half. It's called Sister of the Bollywood Bride. And I've also written several books that were published in India.
My name is Misa Sugiura, and I'm the author of, my most recent, well, not recent, my very upcoming book is called Love and Other Natural Disasters. And it's a sapphic rom-com about a girl who is trying to reinvent herself after kind of a humiliating rejection. And part of that reinvention includes finding a beautiful, perfect girlfriend. And she finds somebody to be her girlfriend via a fake dating scheme, which she agrees to, knowing that in every rom-com, the fake dating relationship always ends up as the real relationship, and hijinks ensue.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sabina Khan. I'm the author of The Love and Lives of RUKHSANA Ali, which came out a couple of years ago, and Zara Hossein is Here, which just came out last month. And Love and Lives of RUKHSANA Ali is about a Muslim Bangladeshi lesbian who is caught by her parents with her girlfriend, and they ship her off to Bangladesh and try to get her married off before any hint of a scandal can get out. Zara Hussein is Here is about a Pakistani immigrant family who is waiting for their green cards, and there's a bully at Zara's school who is harassing her constantly, and his actions go so far as to jeopardize their immigration status, and Zara has to find a way to sort of fight back against the system and stay in the only place that she knows as home.
Okay, so now we're going to go through and answer some questions. So our first question for today is, what is the model minority myth, and why is it harmful for Asian Americans or Asians all over the world? Who wants to go first?
Katie, right?
Am I going first?
Yes.
Oh, I thought I was going first. Okay, never mind. So the model minority stereotype, well, essentially it's this idea that white supremacy really has just painted over all Asians, which is that we're somehow like very naturally inclined to be studious. They typically use the stereotype of AAPIs as like the model minority in order to pit us against other minority groups. And it's a very insidious way for them to sort of like keep control over all minorities and like put us into like very specific brackets that we aren't naturally supposed to fill. And so it's harmful for obvious ways. It's sort of forced a lot of AAPIs to feel like we have to fit into this, because if we don't, then like we're just sort of like even more invisible than we already are. But then when we do like try to fit into the stereotype, it's a way to actively harm other minority groups. And so the stereotype is like, it's just all around harmful, not just for AAPIs, but for everybody.
I completely agree. I think that, you know, using Asian Americans as, the sort of the good minority or the model minorities is really just a way of putting the other minorities down. And it's completely false, because there's so much diversity within the Asian American community. We have not just like studious people or high achieving people, which by the way is only because of the way immigration has unfolded. Asians weren't allowed into the country for the first half of the 20th century. And then when they were allowed in, it was on, F1 visas, the student visas, and the H1B visas, and they were all geared towards highly educated people and, engineers, and a very, very small slice of Asians in the world. Asians are the biggest slice of humanity on the planet, and they have all kinds of diversity. And what people don't understand is that even though they're very successful Asians, they're also Asians who came as refugees, who have a very different status and who have a very different life experience, and they're all part of the same community. So I don't think I really think it's awful that people use, pit one minority against the other. They, I don't know if you've heard about the lawsuit against Harvard, in which they use Asian Americans to fight affirmative action, which is completely wrong. And I just think people are trying to divide us.
Yeah, I want to, I have so much to say about this.
Me too.
I'll go off in a second, but I want to jump on something you said, Nandini, about immigrants, refugees, sort of the unseen part of, or the unacknowledged communities of Asian Americans, in that like the Hmong community, Cambodian community, a lot of Southeast Asian, Filipino, Pacific Islanders are actually, many of them are either working class or actually, living below the poverty line. And in fact, and for that reason, so there's a whole group of Asian Americans who need social services and who are struggling and who have done, who have really, and there's a lot of Asians in the restaurant industry, in the hospitality industry, that the pandemic has hit really hard. But everyone sort of slips under the radar because there's this sort of like very thin crust of Asians at the top, the well-educated ones who've come in on professional and academic visas. And so the government hasn't done a good job of reaching out to poor Asians because they don't think that Asians are a community that needs help. And so a lot of Asian communities are struggling because they don't get included on surveys because the people calling either speak English or Spanish, no Asian languages. So Asian groups aren't included in which groups are struggling, and no one reaches out to them to offer them social services or say like, here's a resource for you. So just in a way that, just one of the ways that stereotype has harmed our community in ways that sort of invisible ways. And that invisibility is kind of a big thing that I'd love to talk about later too. But yeah, so like, and the thing is that Asians haven't always been the model minority, right? So Nandini, you sort of kind of mentioned this, right? Like, so in the 1800s, when the Chinese started immigrating for the mining and railroad industries, they were seen as criminals and sort of uneducated, drug addicts, dead degenerates. And so that was a big, they were seen as the way that a lot of Latinx communities are seen today. Right? They're taking the good jobs away from white people. They're coming in and stealing our a bit like mines, like Chinese miners would come into abandoned sites and just sort of dig the dregs out of whatever white miners had left behind. And lo and behold, look, a lot of times they had overlooked stuff. And so there's a lot of resentment going on there. And yeah, and in fact, and Chinese were from the 1882, like Chinese Exclusion Act, right? China completely banned every single person from China. And then But Japanese workers were okay until Japan started gaining power and in Asia, and then Japanese and Korean immigrants were completely excluded. I'm sorry, but okay. But the model minority stereotypes started around post-World War II. So Japanese Americans were incarcerated and then allowed to return home. And the American government started producing propaganda videos about how well Japanese Americans were reintegrating into society. So sort of like minimizing the harm that the government had done. And so that narrative started. And then in the 50s, this whole like delinquent youth thing started with the baby boomers, they're like Elvis and what's that one with James Dean, the James Dean movie?
Without Cause.
And Chinatown, leaders of Chinatowns across the United States saw an opportunity to sort of like promote their own community as being well-behaved youth, respectful, hardworking, and that was just turned into a big news story. And that's where that myth, it really started coalescing. And then of course in the 60s, we became a wedge, right? Like basically white America will use any excuse to,
Yeah.
any way to keep especially Black and brown communities down. And that's when we became white adjacent. Like until then, American Asians were brown, until it was convenient to make us into something that would divide like brown communities, basically. That's all I have to say. Thank you for listening to my TED Talk.
Yeah, I obviously agree with everything all of you have said so far. And I just also want to add, I always feel like how, there's so much harm and so much pressure on kids that are growing up in the families surrounded by these expectations and constantly being fed this kind of a myth that they have to be this and they have to be that, and the mental health, the effect it has, the damaging effect it has on the mental health of these young people who just want to be artists and writers and dancers and have this expectation, this heavy burden of having to live up to these really fake kind of standards that I just find that it's so damaging to our youth to have to live up to that, something that's not even, true. But because we are fed this from all sides, we teach it to our children often. It's something. It's just part of the community thinking, sort of. And I just think it's so sad because we miss out on so much talent and so much untapped potential when we push. Because of everything that we are hearing constantly, that a lot of us feel this sort of, and I didn't grow up in the States, but my kids grew up in the States and in Canada, and it's the same thing. You have these you hear about it all the time, clashes within families where no, you should go, like career choices, just hobbies, anything. It's just like all has to be so regimented, and I just feel that you lose out on so much. And you really have to, I feel like there are still young people that have to fight and push back against their families because they want to go into a field that isn't like the approved, whatever thing. And it seems to me, it seems ridiculous to think that another community put these kind of, standards on us, on the Asian community, to say that, oh, well, you have to now be like an example for all the other minorities. And what all of you have said, pitting us against each other if you don't fit into that sort of mold. And, the kind of, even in the 90s, when I came to the States, you would hear people in chat rooms at the time, talking about what kind of pressure they had, to go to become doctors, to become engineers, when all they wanted to do was something else that made them happy. And it's just, I just feel like it's so damaging, and maybe people don't realize it from outside our communities. But also then things like, I've heard people say things about my kids saying that, oh, well, of course, they take up, like you were saying, taking jobs and taking spots at, universities, when all they've done is work hard, just like everyone else is free to do, but also to feel like, oh, I only got in because, people just assume I'm this and that. And so I just feel that it's such a narrow way to look at the large variety within the Asian community. So definitely it's so harmful, and it seems to have continued for a few generations. And we can hope that further generations won't necessarily subscribe to this kind of thinking. But yeah, that's all I have to say.
Okay, so Sabina's answer actually kind of leads into my next question, which is, how did the model minority myth impact your life, if at all, as a teen and or as an adult? And I'll start with Nandini.
Okay, so I didn't actually grow up in this country. I grew up in India. I went to school there, went to college there, and I was basically the mainstream. So there was no, I was completely unaware. And then I moved here in my early 20s, and just didn't really notice much, because when you're an adult, it doesn't affect you as deeply. But when I had my children, that's when I started noticing that. And what Sabina just said about pigeonholing people and assuming that just because you're Asian, you're going to be good at math and you're going to want to have a career in a STEM field or anything like that, is really harmful to our children, or to any teens, in our communities. Because just because the immigration, the way it was set up, they only took in people from certain professions, doesn't mean that's all that they're about. In Asia, you have artists, you have actors, you have writers, you have all kinds of people doing all kinds of things. And just because the majority of immigrants have been engineers or doctors doesn't mean that's what their children should be. They should be encouraged to, we are all writers, right? And they should be encouraged to explore what their actual interests are and pick a field that they actually relate to and want to go into, instead of being pigeonholed into this very narrow area. That's what I feel. And it really harms them to have that stereotype out there.
Yeah, I want to, it's so complicated, because we I think a lot of Asians, we do it to ourselves, right? Especially the ones who sort of the adult the segments of the adult generation that fit into that stereotype, this high achieving, academic, all that stuff. We often buy into that thing of like, well, it's because we work harder and we respect the rules and we follow the rules, and and I'm sure a lot of people even believe, well, yes, of course I'm talented and smart and at math, because that's what my family is. And so we voice those values upon our own children, and we believe that we are a little bit better than other racial minorities, and even other Asian minorities, depending on what our parents might be saying in our ears. And it's so it's just so corrosive, I think, and harmful when we believe that ourselves. So anyway, but about I believed it when I was a teenager. It was a big thing in the 1980s, where Japan was like on the rise with the car industry and technology, and colleges and high schools were starting to like focus their on their Japanese programs. And I was a subject of an article in the Chicago Sun-Times with the headline like "Model Minority Teenagers." It was me and like 3 other kids, that look, they're good at sports, they're good at school, they da 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 da. It was a big picture of me, and I was like, oh, yes, that's me. And I think it definitely put the blinkers on. Like I believed that that's what Asians were, and I didn't realize why, right? And where it all came from. Uh, and that was the beginning of like, oh, they're admitting too many Asians into colleges. And so that's a tricky thing too with our community. Like, I think some people are like, well, they need to just, let everybody in who gets all the high scores and stuff. And at the other way, on the other end is, do they though? Like, I think a lot of the sort of upper crust Asians will be okay, financially anyway. I don't know. It's complicated. We can just move on. Like someone else can address that.
It is definitely, Misa, what you're saying. It is so complicated because I think we can't help but internalize a lot of these beliefs and these sort of, mindsets. And for like, as a parent, I absolutely emphasized education and academic, a good work ethic in school in both my girls, simply because I want them to be successful. And, what I didn't do is, kind of force them to go into a field that maybe when I was younger, I was told that would be the best choice because I didn't follow it myself. And, I didn't follow that path. I came to college later. Like I dropped out of college and came back after I got work experience because I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And this was in Bangladesh. And, that was so unusual at the time because everyone just followed, you go to high school, you go to college, you get a job, you get married, and, you just kind of follow that sort of thing. And dropping out is a sure sign of like, oh my goodness, she'll never make anything of her life. But the thing is that I'm a lot happier because I didn't follow that kind of prescribed path because I needed to figure it out for myself. And I really wanted my kids to do that as well. And, if they decide to go into whatever, like a STEM field or, go for higher degrees, that should be their choice. That should be something they want to do, that they're passionate about doing. And I think what is really important as parents, especially, to kind of drill into our children is this belief that if you are passionate about what you do, you will be successful because you'll be a happy person. You will do well naturally because you're passionate about your work. So it doesn't really matter what field you're in, which is so much better than being in a field you don't want to be in, but just to go into it because your parents told you or society tells you or your community tells you that this is the most lucrative field or career for you to be in. I think individually, we all have so much to offer. And I don't think that any large group should be able to, tell you or dictate what kind of thing you're going to go into. But like you were all saying, it's hard to step outside of that because that's what you're hearing your entire life. And, you have all these examples that are set up for you. And so even though that myth may have been started outside the community for completely different reasons, I just feel like we have internalized it quite a bit. I think, at least, that's how I feel personally, that we have internalized it. And I think it takes a bit of work to kind of start, thinking outside. And, but I think the next generation is changing. I think they're, like Nandini was saying, that in South Asia, we have writers and actors and musicians, and it's such a rich culture. How can we just sort of pretend that doesn't exist simply because, decades ago, only a certain class of immigrant was allowed in? But then what about the kids? And, I guess when you immigrate, you do bring your mindset with you, and then you do pass it on to the next generation. But then that generation that's growing up here has more access to options and stuff. So, hopefully that sort of myth will kind of dissipate, or the effects of that will dissipate with coming generations. We can hope, right?
Yeah.
I think I'm next, right? Yeah. So I was born in the US. I was born in 96. So I'm in like that weird little divide between being Gen Z and being millennial, I think. Some of us call ourselves millennials. I don't really know. But the point is that I was born like in a still in like a time when a lot of like Asian immigrants were still sort of like feeding into this like model minority myth like very heavily. And at that time, I didn't know like what the model minority myth was. Like I didn't learn until college, I think. I went to high school in like a predominantly white area, and as a teen, I was fed this lie from, you know, every angle, from school, from seeing Asians only portrayed as nerds on TV, from seeing us as like, you know, the side characters who were always very studious in books, you know, I just everywhere all the time. And you know, even from my own parents, like they always had like these expectations of me to get very high grades and to become a doctor, lawyer, engineer, which I know it's like something that a lot of Asian people talk about, but it's true. Like a lot of people who immigrated from Asia, like a lot of them who, you know, did come here with, you know, higher education than other immigrants. Of course, they would like try to put the same mindset on their kids. And so for me, it was a battle, because while I was like good at school and I always enjoyed school, I didn't want the kind of career or future that my parents wanted for me. What my parents wanted was very much something that, you know, I knew my heart wasn't in. I never liked math at all. I was okay at it, but I didn't want to pursue it as a career. And I enjoyed science, but not to the point of wanting to make that my career either. And my only like real love in life was writing. And when I brought that up to my parents, you can probably all imagine their reaction. It was not, it didn't go very well. Let's just put it that way. And, you know, I learned never to bring it up again, but I would still like pursue what I love to do in secret. So it was, you know, for most of my teens and into early adulthood, I was almost like living two lives, where I was like, okay, I'll go to this university and I'll like try to study these subjects they want me to pursue, but I'm gonna keep writing secretly. And then there came a point in my life where my parents essentially like forced me into this accounting program, and then I went along with it. But I really, like, during that year, I realized like I've reached like a fork road. I can't be this model minority, like you know, kid who goes into like a business or STEM field that they want me to be, because my heart is with creativity and writing. And so I really just like decided at that moment that I needed to stop trying to fit into this mold, even if, you know, it upset my parents. And I think that's something that I'm seeing in mostly Gen Z, but also like millennial and a little bit in millennials, is that a lot of the Asians I know are becoming more creative. We're certainly seeing a lot more representation than you know, we did before, where like, you know, we see Asians in like cool roles on TV now sometimes. We're not always the nerd anymore. And I think all of that is going to help, and it's going to continue like showing that Asians are not a monolith and that we can do whatever we want to do. And hopefully that kind of representation will slowly like chip away and like ultimately destroy the model minority myth, because as I think Sabina brought up, it's a really terrible myth to put on Asian youth, because like not every kid is good at math and science. Not every kid is good at school, or, you know, wants to be good at school or anything. And I think that's fine. I think as long as you know like what you want to do with your life, like you should be able to just do it. It shouldn't be like you know, your parents, which is like the most harmful thing, is like your parents telling you, if you don't do this thing, you're going to be unsuccessful, blah, blah, blah. I think that's just terrible. And it's horrible on the mental health of our youth. But again, as I said, hopefully like with increased representation, we'll start to see more positive change and a lot less of the model minority myth.
Yeah, my experience was pretty similar to Katie's, where I was born in the 90s, and then like I was directly like harmed by it, like, without really knowing what it was. Like I also didn't realize learn the term model minority myth until I took like race class, gender classes in like college. But one of the I don't remember much about like high school, but like one of the distinct memories I had, well, I used high school classes, but one of the distinct memories I had about high school is that I was never good at math or science. And I remember when I was sitting in pre-calc class, utterly confused of what's going on. And our teacher actually said, quote unquote, I don't need to explain this because all your Asians know stuff anyway. And it just was very shocking to me. So I was like, okay, I know that we have like smart people in my class, but like I'm an Asian, I don't understand what's going on. So like it was often used as like an excuse that I mean, I'm not saying that like all my teachers are racist, but like in particular that teacher, she used it as an excuse to not teach us, basically. And I think she actually also like later on in the school year, she like kind of like got away with not teaching by having us like present information in textbook and teach ourselves. And it was really weird. But and then we couldn't even like report her because she was the department head of our school, like of the math department. So I think like I'm just thinking about like in what case it kind of remind me of like my own like childhood growing up about like how not just me but a lot of my other Asian friends we all grew up with this like idea that like if you're not good at math or science or not even at school you're like a failure of an Asian. And like that's just so wild because it's not like all Asians are good at math and science, and it's just like that. It's not even like a core part of our identity, and it's just something horrible stereotype that like hopefully things are getting better today. All right, so that's it for that question. So I'm gonna take us to the next question, which is, what are some ways that your book combats the stereotype or addresses it, and why did you choose to write about this in your book? And I'm gonna start with Misa.
Well, let's see. Actually, I'm gonna pop up another book here. It's called This Time Will Be Different, which is where I sort of directly, sorry, let's see. The problem with back. Okay, that's good enough, right? This time will be different, which directly addresses the model minority trope, or like, and in that book, I sort of detailed the history of the model minority and myth, and this features a girl, and I think a lot of there's a sort of a whole genre of Asian young adult books where the protagonist does not fit the mold, right? The parents want the child to be academically successful or go into science or math or medicine or whatever, and the child is unable, sort of constitutionally unable to do it. And that's, yeah, it's the same thing with her. She's really interested in the flower shop that her aunt runs. She's losing business, and it's sort of airy-fairy, kind of dabbles in this idea of magic in the flowers, and her high-achieving venture capitalist millionaire mom just poo-poos it and is like, when are you gonna, get your shit together and think about your college applications and this and that. And she feels just like you said, Lyla, she doesn't like, she feels ignored and erased, and like maybe she's not the right kind of Asian, and resentful. Yeah, so I tried to flip it that way. And then, and actually, this one too, Love and Other Natural Disasters, I guess I didn't have to put that one up, features 3 Asian lesbians, and that's a group of people, and Sabina, you can speak to this too, that gets overlooked in that stereotype, as well as, it's not the model minority stereotype, but the, sort of hypersexualized women, the geisha girl and all that stuff, docile and obedient and straight, right? Here for the white man. And yeah, I think in another panel I did, someone mentioned like growing up as an Asian and lesbian and thinking that can't be right because Asians aren't gay or Asian women aren't lesbians. And yeah, so I kind of I like having that. I like that my characters buck the stereotype in that way as well.
Oh, sorry.
Getting muted.
Is it me?
Yeah, it's Sabina's muted.
Sorry, I was muted. So
Yeah.
both my books, the characters are queer, and they certainly don't fit the mold at all, or the stereotype at all, really. So Rukhsana is fighting against her own family because they just, for them, it's like, we came here, we sacrificed all this, so much for you to give you a better life. And how dare you be a lesbian, and ruin everything. And now how will people look at us? So she's constantly fighting back against that. In Zara's case, it's a little bit different. Her parents are very accepting of her identity, but she's fighting against, she's not willing to keep her head down like she's expected to and just follow all the rules. I mean, she is following all the rules, but when somebody is trying to hurt her and her family, she steps out of that sort of, she crosses the line and she pushes back. And she doesn't want to just be quiet and wait for things to sort of work themselves out. She wants to push back, and she's also a social activist. Like she's in this club, in the social justice club, where she and her friends are, going to rallies and standing up for other communities that are marginalized and don't feel safe. So she's not, she doesn't fit into that, that sort of stereotype where you just, you come home from school and you study and you do all the appropriate extracurricular activities. You certainly don't go don't go around stirring up trouble, which is not exactly like her intent, obviously. But yes, when you try to stand up for your rights, sometimes you do stir up a lot of trouble. And in her case, the trouble is really big. But yeah, I just wanted to really show that, I mean, you have these, both characters are academically inclined, they want to go to Ivy League schools and they have a career in mind, but at the same time, they're also falling in love with the wrong people, according to what everyone says. They're pushing back against people who want them to stay in their little kind of pigeonhole, and I think it's really important for readers to recognize that, and to just to know that, yes, there are Muslim lesbians, there are Muslim bisexual people, they exist, and they have, they fall in love and they fight and they dance and they do all those things while they are also pursuing, their, whatever their goals are. And their goals are not always all the same. I mean, they have other interests, and they do clash with their families. They're not the obedient little girls that everybody thinks that they should be, or something, some sort of, character like that. But yeah, so I think it was really important to me because my girls never saw any characters like them growing up when they were reading books. So, I wanted at least, people now that, and it's so great that people can have access to these characters who look like us and who look like them. And so, like we were saying all this time, I'm really hopeful that through these books and through these stories that we'll dispel some of these myths and just show the world that there's a lot of different variations within our communities, and that they're all valid, and they're all important, and they all have a right to exist in a safe space that that's their home. So nobody has the right to sort of deny that they exist, because a lot of times, like Misa was saying, Katie was saying, or Misa was saying, and like you were mentioning in another panel, I was on that panel as well, that people just say, oh, Asian queer people don't exist. Well, of course they do. But the thing is, if you don't see stories about them, then it feels like they don't exist. They feel invisible. So that's why it was important for me to really include that in both of my books.
I think
Yeah,
was it, sorry to interrupt. Are you the one who said that? Well, you can talk about it later.
yeah, I was gonna go into it, but it's okay. But yeah, I was gonna say, like, my book, like, kind of combat stereotypes in a similar way. Like, when I was growing up, I was brainwashed by Hollywood and thinking that, oh, Asians are like all nerds, or like they're all straight, or like I mean, I wasn't brainwashed by media for that part, but anyway, so the way I combat stereotypes in my book is that, well, the way I address mono-minority myth in my book is not addressing it at all, because Sky, the main character, she's not a nerd. She doesn't study. I mean, she does study, but like, it's not mentioned that much in the book. my book is this fun book where she's pursuing her dreams of being a K-pop star. And like this book is like 99% like singing and dancing without any mention of academics. And also like almost all the characters in this book are queer, not straight. Also combating the stereotype that like Asians can't be queer, which is a stereotype that I like, grew up with. And yeah, so I think I wrote this book kind of for my teen self that way. And it's like a book that I wish I had, which would have probably helped me feel better about who I was as a teen. But yeah, so Katie, do you want to answer this question?
Yeah, so my YA debut, just to give a quick pitch, How We Fall Apart is basically Crazy Rich Asians meets One of Us is Lying. And it's this dark academia thriller that follows these 4 students at an elite prep school who they find their ex-best friend dead, and this anonymous figure on this school gossip app starts like basically accusing them of being the ones who committed the crime. And the way that I see how this book combats the model minority myth is that it's very concerned with like the surface image that I think a lot of Asian cultures are concerned with, which is that you must give off the appearance of being perfect. And it's, even if you're not, like, you can't let other people know that you aren't. Like, that's the worst thing ever, is to just like have other families perceive you as somehow like going against what should be, whatever they think should be happening. And so in How We Fall Apart, these teenagers are like, they're trying so very hard to like meet their parents' extremely high expectations and just society's extremely high expectations for them. They are very studious, but you know, it comes to a point where, well, the reason why the book is called How We Fall Apart is because you watch these kids fall apart, and like all these secrets that they're keeping, some not so great things they've done in the name of trying to stay at the top of the class. All of that comes to light throughout the course of the book. And earlier we talked about how the model minority myth is terrible for the mental health of Asian youth. And that's something that I also wanted to explore in this book, was just showing how, like, when you have like so much pressure on these kids all the time to perform up to these like unrealistic standards and to, you know, fit themselves into these molds that they don't even necessarily want to fit into, they're just doing it because it's what they think they have to do, based on what society, what their parents tell them. That all takes an enormous toll on their mental health. And I know this because it did so for me when I was younger. It was just so very hard, and it like trying to like fit into this like perfect mold of whatever my parents wanted me to be, that led me to the darkest period of my life. And so writing this book was me writing about some of, you know, those emotions, all the hurt that I felt that my parents like wouldn't accept me as I was, or that society wouldn't accept me as I was, all the stress I was under because of like AP exams and SAT testing, and feeling like I was failing to meet these impossible standards that I had to because I was Asian. Like, I tried to put all of that in this book, and I really hope that in the writing, or when Asian teens especially read this book, they'll feel like, oh, it's, you know, all this, that's all these impossible standards, this model minority myth, like, it's really terrible, and it's okay to not fit into these standards because they're unrealistic and they shouldn't be fit into, because this myth is what's tearing apart Asian youth, and not only our youth but also the youth of other minority communities.
So my book, my first book is A Match Made in Mehendi. And it's about Simran Sangha, who comes from a long line of Indian matchmakers. So her grandmother, her mother, her aunts, you know, previous generations of women have all been matchmakers. And she kind of has the gift to put people together. And she is not interested in STEM at all. She likes art, but her family wants her to go into the matchmaking business because they think that she has a talent. So it's completely outside of the normal expectations of what an Asian American character would be. And I really had fun with that because, you know, when I was growing up in India, the dumbest kid in the class was Indian. The smartest kid in the class was Indian. Everybody every place where you could fall, you know, the kids who were into art were Indian, the kids who were into filmmaking were Indian, everybody, there was no other, you know, demographic. So, and I was one of the artsy kids, right? So my character, Simi in A Match Made in Mehendi, and in the new book, which is Sister of the Bollywood Bride, comes out on May 25th. Both my girls are artists and they like art. And Minnie likes fashion design, and Simi is just trying to explore different mediums of art. And the way I wrote the family dynamics is that the parents don't really get it, but they're fine with it. They're open to it. And I think, you know, there's a lot of, well, you know, the parents are never okay with it if you want to step outside the STEM fields. And that is not true, because you have all different types of people in the Asian American community. There are parents who may not understand it, but they would support their children. So that is the kind of parents that I have in my books, that, you know, they don't understand it, they're very confused by it, but they're like, okay, fine, you want to do it, go ahead, you know, good, it's fine. And you know, the father's an engineer in Sister of the Bollywood Bride, and he really doesn't get it, but her aunt is a famous fashion designer from India, and she in the end supports her. I should not be saying this, but
Spoilers.
but you know, you have people who are in different fields, and honestly, that's what you want. You want there to be Asian artists, you want there to be Asian filmmakers, you want there to be Asian everything, because it enriches the entire fabric of society. You know, it adds so much to the fabric of society in every place. You want restaurants to be owned by Asians, but you want engineers, but you also want them in every other field, because it just improves you know, just everybody else's understanding. It provides windows into, you know, that culture for everybody else as well, and it allows people to see themselves in it. So anyway, that's how I tried. I want my books to be about joy, about happiness, not about pain. And when I was growing up, there weren't those books. So that's my little, you know, attempt to help.
I love that you have, and Sabina, I know that you in your second book, in the Zara Hussein, the parents are more accepting than the sort of stereotypical Asian parents. And you know, it's funny because that was also my experience growing up. Sorry to blah blah blah, but yeah, I have, my second cousin is a famous actor in Japan, you know, and my great uncle was a poet, and my mom and my aunt studied opera, and so in my family, and their best friends early on when they moved, and they made a Japanese couple friend when they immigrated. The dad was an architect, and so yeah, like all of our parents of these two families encouraged us. You know, I was an English major and my sister was an art history major, and you know, my friend was an anthropology major, and my other friend, you know, like, so we're here.
I know.
Yeah.
But it's I just like that. I love that those parents are in your books as well, and living in the Silicon Valley, which is full of engineers who are pushing their kids, just like in your book, Katie, and I just I've seen that happen to kids who it's just so cutthroat that the parents buy into this whole and want to, and you know, and they're immigrants, they want their children to do well and follow in their footsteps too. So but yeah, mental health, there's another panel this month about mental health, right?
Yes.
Which I think is really important.
Okay, so I think everyone already touched on this a little bit in their answers, but if anyone has any other thoughts, feel free to answer. Why is it important to recognize that Asians are non-monoliths?
So I think based, like, obviously what everyone already said, we are not a monolith. So our stories should also represent, you know, character, or show characters that, you know, cover, or, you know, they show all the beauty and the variety, the entire spectrum of personalities and talent and potential that exist in the Asian American community. And I think when we don't recognize that, or when the world doesn't recognize that, it's such a disservice, because it's so hard to find resources for people if they don't, if people don't realize that a need exists for those resources. So if you can talk about, the mental health, the stigma for mental health issues in our community, queer representation, or the existence of queer people in our communities, they need resources as well. They need support. They need to feel that they're part of a larger community, that they're not alone, that they don't have to suffer alone. They don't have to be joyous alone. They have, they have a community to celebrate with. They have a community to turn to. And I think when, if we don't show the world that all these people exist, then we're just, we're cheating these people out of things that they're entitled to, just like any other group. And I think it's really, it's really great that we as authors get to write these characters based on our experiences growing up, in different cultures, around different cultures, because, we're just getting started, right? We're just getting started. So, even with my 2 books, I was able to show 2 ends of the spectrum, as far as, like Misa was saying, the parents. One set of parents is deeply conservative, very traditional. The other is completely accepting. And it was such a beautiful thing to write. It gave me such joy to write Zara's parents, because they were more representative of me. Like, that's how I am. I have no, I just want my kids to be happy, so that's how Zara's parents are. They just want her to be safe and happy, and that's all they care about. No, she can study what she wants, she can be with whomever she wants. And obviously there are many parents like that who exist in real life in our community, because we all know these people. But yes, it's true, there are also parents like RUKHSANA's parents, and everything in between. But I'm so happy, and I feel really fortunate that I have the opportunity to write these kinds of stories and to read your stories, all of your stories. And we're just getting started. We have so many more stories to tell, and hopefully, people will begin to realize that, like, even within the Asian culture, there are so many, even within the Asian communities, there are misconceptions and myths, right? Based on, like, Muslims or Hindus or Sikhs, or, like, we all have these sort of preconceived ideas of what people are like. And even for us, it's important to, to learn more about our, Asian brothers and sisters and children, and the parents, and and it's so important for the older generation to have access to these books as well, to these stories, to see what the younger people now are going through, what kind, because my issues, the things I went through, the things I struggled with as an immigrant in the 90s, are not the same things that my daughters will encounter as, having been born and raised in this community, but looking like me. So that there are 2 different things, and there need to be stories about all of those experiences and all the joys and all the celebrations. And for example, my family, I'm in an interfaith marriage. We celebrate all kinds of things, and there's no, like, even our family is like, my kids were born here, my husband and I were born in different places, we're different religions, we have different, we even though I'm from Bangladesh, he's from India, but we come to this life from different perspectives, and I think it's important to share all those stories, because there are lots of people like that. When I didn't know a single other person who was in an interfaith marriage, and I can tell you that it was very lonely not being able to have anyone to talk to about, when you're raising your kids, what do you teach them? It would have been nice to have other parents who are in the same situation. And then what about the kids themselves growing up in these households, what kind of experiences do they have? What kind of questions do they have? It's great to know that, so if you don't realize that these people exist, then the community, like, you don't have the resources, you don't have that networking opportunity. And so I think that makes it so important that, the more stories we put out there to kind of show the world that, we are not a monolith.
Yeah, adding on to that, I don't know how it is about other countries, but I know that in America, Asian Americans have the greatest economic disparity out of all the minorities. And I feel like a lot of people don't know that. Like, I feel like even like other minorities think that all like Asians like rich or like educated, but it's not true. And it's just, I think Misa was talking about this too, about how like this prevents Asians who need help to get the help that they need. So I think we just need to dispel this myth and this concept that all Asians are the same, so that like not only do Asians get the help that they need, but also we stop putting that pressure to ourselves to like kind of like we stop putting pressure on ourselves to like conform to this ideal that's not real. So that was my answer. How about you, Katie? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that's already been said. And I think another thing to add on is that like this conversation is especially timely right now because of the rise in anti-Asian hate crimes that have been happening everywhere. And it's like, yes, like a lot of it started because of like the incorrect rhetoric that Donald Trump spread, saying that, you know, China is responsible for COVID and like basically putting, you know, Chinese people in danger. But like when people say stuff like that, because of the way that Asians are like viewed all like as the same, is that like even if you just look Asian, like you might not even be Asian, but not even like thinking about like all the different experiences within AAPIs, but like you might not even be Asian, you might just look Asian and you'll suddenly be like seen as the other. And so like all of this, like the whole thing about the model minority myth, and you know how fragile it is like it's very obvious right now, because we are only model minorities until something like this happens where, you know, the US administration is messing up and all they can do to cover for their own mistakes is to think, let's push the blame on the Chinese, and like, you know, blame all them for that. But then by them doing that, they end up blaming all Asian diaspora, and everyone is in danger. And no longer are we like the gold standard for minorities, or are we like studious and perfect and everything. Now suddenly we're like the enemy and people feel free to just like attack us because of the way that we look. So yeah, I think it's really important that we keep having these conversations, and that, you know, we all keep writing our stories about Asians who have very different experiences and show that we're not like just one, you know, one monolith that you know, people can feel free to change the narrative whenever they want based on if they want to use us as a weapon against other minorities or to like see us as the enemy. We're just human, and AAPIs we have such vastly different experiences. We're all very, very different. We can be creatives, we can be mathematicians, we can be whatever we want. And yeah, hopefully by us telling our stories and continue to talk about this, then we can show people that we're not a monolith.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And I think people are afraid of things they don't understand. And people are afraid of things that they can't relate to. And the reason they can't understand and relate to certain people is because there isn't a lot of art, stories, you know, movies, books, you know, that they have read, because everybody doesn't have, you know, friends from every single type of demographic. But, you know, I grew up in India and I read so many books that were set in the US and set in the UK. So when I came here, I never felt strange, you know, I understood the culture, but that isn't available. And if there are books like ours and stories like ours from all different parts of this huge Asian American experience, then people will have empathy, people will have acceptance, people will have understanding, people will grow because they will have access to it. Because I don't think people, you know, if they're exposed to something and they can relate to it, they do understand and they can grow from that experience. Even the older generation, like Sabina was saying, if they read our books and they say, oh, wow, you know, these parents are totally cool with this. So they might actually grow and learn from that. And you grow and learn from having some kind of interaction, some kind of information, some kind of a, experience where you get to experience this person's, life and how they feel and how they act and what they want. And then you have this understanding and coming together. So this is why it's important to show, to understand that Asian Americans are not a monolith. They have all kinds of different, the danger of a single story. You think, I know the Indian American story is this. No, there's a million other facets to it. I know the Chinese American story or the Japanese American story or whatever Asian demographic story. And it's good to have all our stories out there and have that understanding so people can actually, have the empathy and have, the feeling of understanding of the humanity of everyone. And the other last thing I want to say is that, like Sabina said, that she's an interfaith marriage, there are people in interracial marriages, like look at Kamala Harris, yay for Kamala Harris, right? When her mom came here on a student visa, she met her father and he was, a Black immigrant and she was a Asian immigrant, and look at that child, how successful she is. And, those things should be portrayed in our stories and in other people's stories. And I'm glad that they're available.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think with everybody, there need to be more stories. And this idea of a monolith, I was just, there are 100, I just looked it up the other day, 148 Asian countries, Asian Pacific countries, island, and literally thousands of languages, right? So even, I'm so proud of us for putting out more and more different kinds of stories, but there's so much room for so much more. And I and like Lyla was saying, there are groups who have, Asian American groups, Pacific Island groups who have been completely overlooked and ignored because they don't fit into that stereotypes, because they are poor, because they aren't professional, because they don't look like East Asian, or maybe, like I think even South Asian, Indian and Pakistani and Bangladesh, and like that group of Asians is often not considered truly, it's all, I just think it's important that we keep writing and keep showing the world that there is not just what has been portrayed in the movies up until this point. And I hope, I have a friend who's Cambodian who has this, she and her husband had this like crazy, amazing story. They both grew up as children under the Khmer Rouge and spent a lot of their childhoods running away or hiding, and both had incredible immigration stories. And she said, you got to tell my story. You should write a book about my story. And I was like, you should write a book, or your daughter should write a book. And so Cornelia, if you're listening, it's your turn to write a book about that story, about your story growing up as a Cambodian American. Yeah, I guess my point is, I just want more. I want more. And
how about you, Sabina?
I'm sorry, who's next?
I think we all answered the question.
Yeah, we all
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
sorry. Then our final question is, what is one thing that you wish audiences will take away from this panel? And I think I will start. So one thing that I wish that people would take up from this panel is that we can just talk all we want about stereotypes, but in reality, in countries, in white dominated countries like America, we can't, no change will happen unless we have non-Asian allies support us. So I hope that if you're non-Asian and listening to this panel or watching this panel, I hope that you kind of increase your empathy and also kind of listen to us and just try your best to be a good ally, because we do need your support. And yeah, and attacks against Asians are still going on today. So that's kind of what I want to say. How about you, Katie?
Yeah. I mean, I think like, yeah, like you said, we can talk until we're blue in the face, but it's like there won't, I feel like we have these conversations a lot, more and more in the past couple of years. But it feels almost like something hurtful will happen to the AAPI community, and then we all band together and we say like, we raise awareness, we write articles, we host events to talk about like why we're human and why people should see us as human. But then like all the awareness sort of drops off after a while, right? And like it feels like there's no like real substantive change that we can see. So I don't know what the solution is, but I just know that, you know, if you're in the audience and you're an ally, like please like listen to what we're saying and also support us, like donate to AAPI causes, like Stop AAPI Hate is still accepting donations, specific to publishing, like invest in our stories, because if you invest in more Asian stories, then publishers will say, we want more of them. Yeah, exactly. And they'll buy more and more. And I'm a Chinese American author, so I feel like we still don't have like a ton of Chinese American stories. But when I think of the Asian stories that we do have, like it's like Chinese American and like Korean American and like Japanese American, I feel like are probably some of like the most visible ones that we have so far. And I would love to see more from AAPI authors, especially ones who we don't typically view as like Asian because they're not East Asian. But that won't happen if we don't have allies who are really like willing to invest with us and continue to support us even when we're not like crying out about how hurt we are because of these attacks. Like just see us as human and like be willing to invest your time and your money in us, and hopefully that'll help make some change.
You know, I am very optimistic about young adult literature, because the people that we write for, teenagers, they are different than the previous generations. They have more tolerance, they have more knowledge, they have more understanding. Maybe I'm just, saying what I hope or wish was true, but I really hope, and because we now have more diversity in young adult writing and in children's writing, and in publishing in general, it's very small change, but hopefully it'll keep going. And I hope it's not just a phase and it drops off. But I have faith in the people that we're writing for, young people. I think young people will continue to broaden their horizons and understand people from all different backgrounds. And so if you are not Asian, if you're a white person, if you're Hispanic, if you're Black, whatever, read about us, and we should read about you, and we should read about other minorities, and just increase understanding between all different groups, because all our stories are important. And the last thing I'd like to say is that if you are an Asian American and you don't see your stories out there, because I know at least in India there's a lot of diversity. You have different castes, you have different regions, you have different languages, you have different religions, you have a lot of diversity in India, and I don't see all of them out there. And I'm not equipped to write some of those books, and I wish that if you feel that you're not being seen, write it, just go for it, and hopefully it'll be supported and it'll be out there.
Yes to all of that. Yeah, if you're an ally, support us, right? Buy our books, or if you're an agent or an editor, just be more, solicit more Asian stories. If you're a writer, if you're an aspiring author, just go for it. Take the plunge. Take advantage of the Twitter pitches and to pitch wars and mentorships that are offered, and yes, we're waiting for you. We want your stories. And if you are someone who really, really does believe in the Asian model minority myth, you're probably not watching this. Like, I was gonna, so I don't have a message for you, but for everybody else, tell those people, tell the Asians, tell the white, tell everybody else that's not who we are.
So I want to, obviously I agree with everything you all have said, but I also want to just add, if you're an educator, if you're a teacher or a librarian, share our stories with your students, because I think at that level and, you know, in that space, you can really affect some change, because you introduce stories in your, you know, include them in your curriculum and discuss them as a group. That will bring so much awareness, and it would change the perceptions people have and dispel the stereotypes, and really, I think, teach the younger people, the youth, to empathize, you know, with each other, with, you know, the world around them. And I think that's so important. And I think as an educator, you really can make such a huge difference, because when you support our stories, you're spreading the word to so many more people than, you know, than an individual can, you know, obviously just because of numbers. But yeah, that's really all I wanted to add is, you know, talk about our stories, include them, buy our books for your classrooms. And of course, you know, we've all seen, as authors, from our previous books, we've all gotten messages from teachers, librarians, and students who have talked about how, you know, they've read our books in their classes and how much of an impact it made, you know. And even if it's one or two kids that, you know, have some sort of you know, a deeper understanding from those stories, I think that that's a huge difference. I think that has such a huge impact.
Yeah. Going off of like what Sabina said about supporting us, we'll now go around and tell y'all where you can find us online. You can find me at Literary Lyla on Instagram and Twitter. My website is lylaleebooks.com. How about you, Katie? How can people find you?
You can find me at KT Zhao author, so KTZHAO, then author. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and my website is www.ktzhao.com.
You can find me at nandinibajpai.com. You can find me on Twitter as @Nandini Bajpai. You can find me on Instagram as Nandini RB. That's how you spell Nandini, NANDINIBAJPAI. So I know, because I get questions all the time.
You can find me on my website, which is misasugiura.com, www.misasugiura.com. And you, I think my name is in my little thing here, so you can check the spelling there. And I am on Twitter and Instagram at miscellaneous with 2 N's and 2 L's, miscellaneous 1 on Twitter and Instagram.
Yeah. My website is sabina-khan.com, and I'm on Twitter and Instagram as Sabina_writer. So that's where you can find me.
Okay, so that concludes our panel. Thanks everyone for coming or watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.